Howdy y'all, Caleb here. Since we had the battle scroll a few weeks ago, I figured it was time to do a little reevaluation of the efficiency of our units. So, I reran all the numbers to see what units are the most efficient in Seraphon. So, just methodology behind this. What this does is it measures the unit cost points per damage versus just a generic 4-up save. So, if you're looking at a 100-point unit and it does 10 damage, that's 10 points per damage. That kind of gives us a baseline for what to expect from this efficiency chart. It measures the expected buffs. So something like all-out attack is very easy to put on a unit, so we can include that as a buff for each unit. But it also includes like expected war scroll buffs. If there's something that I generally get in the course of the game, then I'll include that. But something exotic like Rage 3 on Aggradons, I'm not going to include in the efficiency chart just because that's not realistic for the vast majority of the game. I'm also not going to stack every possible buff that I can onto a unit because, again, that's just not really how this game of Warhammer works. You can stack some units to the sky, and that really does help their efficiency, but we're not going to show that for every single unit here in the chart. Many support heroes show poorly just because they're not really designed to do damage. They're there for other things. Buffing other units, casting spells, sometimes just there so you can actually make a list in the list builder. This metric also doesn't account for wound density, movement, control, any kind of special abilities. So if a unit is showing poor on efficiency like a Slon, that's just because it doesn't do much damage. It's there for something else. And I've updated it for the new points costs. So we're going to kind of look at a 3-tier system. Our bottom tier, this is our tier 3 units. These are the units that are not very efficient in our army. You'll see a lot of things on here like support heroes, like your Slon, your Skink Wizards and things. Those aren't expected to be very efficient with points. But some things that I'm a little disappointed to see show up here on this list are the things like your Stegadon with Solar Engine. That is a damage dealer, and he just is not good at doing damage, unfortunately. I did not include any of its combat profiles because you really don't want this thing in combat. So I did put over here on the buff notes that there is no combat rolls in this because if your Stegadon gets into combat, it is finished. Because it's not gonna kill anything in combat with its only little tail attack. And so it can't shoot in combat, it's done. So, that one is not very efficient. Your Skink Oracle on Troglodon is not very efficient. Now, it is a caster too. It does a little bit of utility with its -1 to hit, but that's not really reliable. So, I would like to see the damage efficiency on the Troglodon come up higher. Things like Terror Wing, Spawn of Chotek just are not very good in the current game. So, these are our tier 3, not very efficient units. So, you don't put them in a list unless you're looking to use them for whatever kind of utility they have. Tier 2 is where we start to see the stuff in the middle of the pack. So things like our Source Guard turn out fairly well. They're at the top of this tier. They're cheap, and they put out quite a few attacks. So they have 3 attacks each, and they take buffs decently well. It's not a lot of damage output, but because they're so cheap, you end up with a fairly efficient unit. Notably, the Warriors are a little bit less efficient, but they have a higher damage output. And because they end up with more attacks and more bodies, I think if I'm looking for pure damage from one of these big blocks of wounds, I might go Warriors. If you're pairing it up with a Slon, I think you still go with Source Guard. On this chart, I was quite surprised to see the Stegadon Chief end up so high in this tier. I have kind of turned around on the Stegadon Chief. I like him. If you want to bring him in your list, I'm perfectly fine with that. I think he's a decent choice, almost purely because of his rampage. He has a really good rampage where when you charge, you roll a D3 dice, and on a 2-up, you're going to do 2 or 3 mortal wounds plus 2 mortal wounds. So you could do 4 to 5 mortal wounds on that rampage, which is not too shabby. That's pretty good. He has okay damage with his shooting and melee. It's not terrible. It's enough to get him on the higher end of this efficiency chart. And one of our better heroes as far as combat goes. And so if you're looking for a big monster hero to put in your list, and he does unlock a lot of skink and Kroxagore stuff, so he can fit in that way if you're just not wanting to take a skink priest. So he'll take some of the heroic traits and artifacts very well. I think a Stegadon Chief is a decent pick. We do have Pterodon Riders that make it up here. I think that's purely just because of how cheap they are. They do almost no damage, but they are so cheap that you could use them to score battle tactics, score objectives, that type of thing. They're super fast. They fly. They won't do any damage, so don't take it for that capability. Kroxagore, just their base War Scroll made it into this tier. And you'll see on the next tier why I broke this Kroxagore up like this. But I wanted to see what the Kroxagore without any of their War Scroll buffs do as far as efficiency. And they land on the higher side of this middle tier as just the Kroxagore, no buffs, no -1 or no +1 to Ren, and no +1 damage. So even without all that, they still end up being a fairly decent unit. And I think that's why they always feel good in a list, because even if they don't have their buffs, they're still doing decent damage. And if it's reinforced, with all-out attack, even if they don't get all their buffs, they're still doing, 23 damage. So still a good unit, even if they're not getting their buffs. Some of the things I would have liked to see better, always, I mean, this is a story of them all the time, is the Carnosaurs. They kind of both end up here in the same spot. To be honest, they're about the same efficiency, so take whichever one you need based on points. If you have enough points to take the Old Blood, take it. If you don't have enough, then take the Scar Veteran on Carnosaur. They are about the same on efficiency. Bastildon with Arc of Sotek makes it into this tier, and it's a really good monster right here. It's tough, it rolls lots of dice, and its rampage is actually pretty good. I included about 5 mortal wounds for its rampage, just kind of guesstimating on what an average would be if you line that up correctly. And so that does help out its efficiency, but a lot of its play also comes from just being a really tough monster that's hard to shift. You are rolling lots of dice, doing some mortal wounds, so that's nice. Scar Veteran on Aggradon kind of dropped down the list because he did go up in points. Doesn't really do much. He's really there for utility. Raptadon Hunters. Ooh, I did split Raptadon Hunters up in between the shooting twice profile and the shooting and melee profile. I had run them first, and all of a sudden the Raptadon Hunters were jumping real high, and I realized, you know what, I think I'm shooting twice and doing their melee. They can only do one or the other. And so I wanted to split that up to see where they end up as far as efficiency. The Raptadon Hunters shooting twice are not as efficient as the Raptadon Hunters shooting and charging. Interesting. So we'll take a look at them here a second. The rest of the Stegadons don't end up very well. They're towards the lower end of this. Skinks are just kind of a sad unit right now. They don't really have a role at 90 points. You'd rather pay 10 points more for Pterodon Riders or 20 points more for Ripperdactyl Riders, or just take Hunters of Huanche. The Skinks are just in a weird place where they're not doing any damage. I mean, look at this damage profile. It's just absolutely terrible. They don't really have a role. They're not a good screen because it's 10 bodies. We have a lot of better screens that can be wider, like Ripperdactyls or Raptadons. So they just kind of end up in a weird place. Krox is on the border here between tier 2 and 3. I did include 10 mortal wounds on his spells just to kind of see what his efficiency would look like if I did include his hero phase. He still does not end up very efficient, and that's with him, casting his 3 spells, one of them failing or getting unbound, I'm assuming, 2 of them passing, but then you're rolling your D3 dice. 2 are missing, 2 are hitting for 2 wounds, and 2 are hitting for 3 wounds. That's where I get the 10 mortal wounds. So not very efficient. All right, on to tier 1. This is our most efficient units, and you can see I broke up the Kroxagore into 3 different categories here because I really wanted to see how they do with different buffs that they get. And I did this for a reason, because I don't think breaking them up into War Spawned and the regular is that useful, because they all have the same buffs. So I broke it up depending on which buff they're getting. So let's start from the bottom up. If we get Kroxagore with just their +1 to rend, okay, That could either be from infantry, fighting infantry, or fighting a monster, just depending on which Krox score you get. They end up in this top tier of efficiency. They get better depending on what else they get. So here they are more efficient if they have their +1 damage instead of +1 rend. And I think that's why I end up favoring Warspond over the regular right now, is because Warspond are much easier to get the +1 damage. I can guarantee that on my turn, where with the normal Krox score, I can't always guarantee that I get +1 damage by fighting something that has 10 or more models. So I can guarantee that with the Krox score Warspond. And that makes them very efficient unit here. Now, where that really gets crazy, they are our most efficient unit if you have both +1 rend and +1 damage. So I think that is probably more likely to happen with the regular Krox score right now, where you get infantry and a unit with 10 or more models. And at that point, they are just absolutely obliterating things. And so I think they're worth taking the regular Kroxagore, because if you do line this up, it will just absolutely destroy things. And so that is our most efficient unit in the army. But either way, even if you don't get all those buffs, if you get one or the other, which is generally what happens, you'll get one of those buffs. They are still a very efficient unit. The other things that work out here in top tier is our Raptadon Hunters with shoot and melee. I was a little surprised by this. I think because they went down by 10 points, they ended up being a fairly efficient unit. If they do shoot and attack, they end up pretty good. Now, they're not as good as Raptadon Chargers, which are 10 points more, but do more damage, especially on the charge. So that's the buff we're giving them. So I think you would still take Raptadon Chargers if you have the extra 10 or 20 points to take them, or take them reinforced. But they still pair well together. If you're taking a reinforced unit of Chargers, go ahead and take a unit of Hunters to back them up, and then be able to charge in later too as needed. So I think they both end up being quite efficient. As it is right now in 4th edition, the light cavalry is very good. Aggradon Lancers still make the top tier, even though they did go up a little bit in points. With I included charge and then 1 rage point, which is generally pretty standard, as you're either taking the Aggradon hero or you've already fought it once against a screen or something like that. But rage 1 is pretty common. So Aggradon Lancers are still very good. And then Ripperdactyl Riders made it into the top tier. Since they did go down in points too, they have an ability with charge to get +1 to damage. And then if you hit a Bloat Toad unit, then you'll get an extra attack. To be honest, the Bloat Toad doesn't really do that much, but this is a unit that reinforces really well because they're super cheap. They can still make an incredibly wide screen. They're so fast, and they can generally hit whatever target you put the Bloat Toad on. So a decent unit here for extremely cheap. If you're looking for something to score objectives or take the flanks or be a screen and you don't have enough points for chargers, Ripperdactyl Riders are a great choice. They're good. So that's tier 1. Here's overall the entire chart. If you wanted to see the entire chart all put together, screenshot that. And this is kind of what our efficiency looks like. All right, moving on. I did want to do one more thing, and that is look at Regiments of Renown efficiency. So I've seen Savoirs of Cinderfall pop up in a lot of competitive lists for Seraphon, and so I wanted to see exactly what they did as far as efficiency. And it turns out they're really efficient. They're really good. For 230 points, Savoirs of Cinderfall can put out an absolute ton of damage against wizards, priests, and manifestations, which are quite prevalent in the meta right now. So if they go into the right target, which is what I'm including here, they're going to do 20 damage versus a wizard, a priest, or a manifestation. So that is awesome, especially for 230 points. And the good thing is, even if they're not going into that type of unit, they still play an incredible role because they're extremely tough on an objective. When this unit's on an objective, I think they go down to a 3-up, 4-up. So a 3-up save, a 4-up ward, which is just not something we have in Seraphon. So that is awesome. I think there are 22 wounds in this unit, and so a very, very good Regiment of Renown that I think you'll see pop up quite a bit. Also quite efficient is Gotrek. I was kind of surprised by this. I know he does a ton of damage. He's 360 points, but he does 30 damage, and you don't have to buff him other than spending a command point to fight twice. But he does have some pretty big downfalls. He's extremely slow, and he's actually really squishy. He's really easy to kill now, which is surprising, because he has a 5-up save, which is terrible. That got worse. And then a 3-up ward, which is fantastic, but he doesn't reduce damage like he used to. So weighted dice will just make him evaporate real quick, and he's so slow. It costs a lot of command points to get him doing what he needs to do. And so I think that's why you don't see Gotrek pop up in many lists right now. He does an absolute ton of damage, and he's efficient for it. For his points costs, he does a ton of damage. You can see kind of where they rank with some of the other things that are around him. The other one I wanted to look at was Bundo, the Mega Gargant. Is actually not too bad. It's about the same efficiency as like our Carnosaur, which was a little surprising. It does more damage. It has a little bit more utility, and can just pick up models. And it doesn't have to fight first. This thing actually wants to fight second, or fight last, so that it gets extra attacks. So you would charge it in with something else, like some Aggradons, Bundo. Bundo is going to get +1 attacks, and he's going to fight last after your Aggradons fight. And they combo up pretty well together like that. So an interesting choice. I don't think I've ever seen anybody taken Bundo in a Seraphon list, at least the ones that I've looked at that have done well. So maybe it's not a meta choice, but it could be a pretty fun choice. You know, he can kick objectives around. He's a big stompy monster, and he's not inefficient, so he's about as efficient as a Carnosaur is. So not too bad. All right, just a sample list real quick. Here's what, if we're taking our most efficient units in a list, I just threw this together real quick. What does it look like? We've got a Slon Star Master, obviously has utility, doesn't do a lot of damage, but is there to unlock list building, unlock spells, recursion, just a great all-around pick, Slon Star Master. Then we have 6 Aggradon Lancers, who are in the top tier of efficiency, 6 Krox Warspawn, which will end up in the top tier of efficiency, Raptadon Chargers, which were there also. I included 2 units of Ripperdactyl Riders to be, my objective scorers, my flankers, and then 2 units of Hunters of Huanche, which is really help debuff the unit. They're not in the top efficiency, but they have really good utility. And then a Starseer as my other skink wizard here. So a pretty good all-around list that all have very efficient units in it and comes in right at 2,000 points at the current prices. So, all right, guys, that's it for unit efficiency for Seraphon. Let me know what you think. Anything I'm missing here that needs to be bumped up the list that's, it's not based purely on damage, Caleb. This is a good unit. Let me know below in the comments. We'll see you all next time.